Welcome to another video from English Einsteins. It's an absolute joy to be with you today. This video is going to help you succeed in your Christmas Carol exam. We'll be delving into the life of Scrooge, the plot, some key quotes in particular, who Scrooge represents, and also showing you how to write your GCSE essay. Please like and subscribe if you find this useful. There'll be many more videos coming your way. Firstly, we need some key words that are imperative to a Christmas Carol. Misanthropic means when someone does not like other people. Make sure you get this written down. Scrooge was misanthropic when? I want you to finish this sentence. When was Scrooge misanthropic? What did he do? Pause and finish the sentence. Next word, philanthropic, means to freely give money or other help to people who need it. The complete opposite of misanthropy. Dickens wanted to promote philanthropy because what happened to him when he was a child? Think about his father. Where did his father go? What happened to Dickens as a result? If you need to, research this. Next word, avaricious, means extremely strong desire for money and possessions, or boiled down, it means greed. The adjective for avarice is avaricious. Dickens denounced avarice, or he didn't like avarice because why might he not have liked avarice? Remember what happened to him when he was a child. The last word then for this lesson, altruism, means generosity. Altruism. And the adjective, which you're more likely to use probably, is altruistic. So Scrooge becomes altruistic later on in the novella. And Fred promotes altruism when? I want you to complete the sentence, so pause here. Fred promotes altruism when? Think of a key quote for Fred. He wants people to open up something and get that written in, please. This is the exam style question we're looking at today. We're going to walk and talk you through this. How does Dickens present Scrooge as a symbol of Malthusian misanthropy? We need to break down this phrase here, Malthusian misanthropy. So basically, it is no secret that Scrooge represents a real-life man called Thomas Malthus, who had some callous political views. We need 4 quotes that show Scrooge is like Malthus and is also misanthropic. So, some context. Firstly, in the Victorian society, paupers were oppressed by the New Poor Laws, which were created in 1834. This meant that they had to go to workhouses, where they were paid no money and living in squalor. Dickens himself experienced destitution. This is really key. This is why he wrote A Christmas Carol, why he has compassion for the poor. Dickens himself experienced destitution or poverty. He criticized the misanthropy of thinkers like Thomas Malthus, who believed that paupers were not invited to nature's mighty feast. And he believed that the death of paupers were inevitable and desirable. So Thomas Malthus desired for paupers to die, so there was more food for the wealthy classes. And Scrooge is compared to that man, Thomas Malthus. More context. Dickens uses the character of Scrooge to show the malleability of individuals. We can all change. Everybody can change. Even if you're a miserable old sinner like Scrooge was in Stave 1, you can change. Scrooge begins as a dogmatically misanthropic individualist. That basically means he only cares for himself and he's very stubborn and doesn't like people. And he rejects philanthropy. He does not like charity at the beginning, remember. He represents the callousness of Thomas Malthus, or we could say of Malthusian ideology. And next it says, after being influenced by the supernatural, he changes and treats those below him in the social hierarchy with altruism and respect. So he changes by the end in Stave 5 and he treats people with respect and care and love. So, quick plot review, broken down into 6 parts here. Scrooge is alone, solitary as an oyster. He's cruel and avaricious at the beginning. Then Marley's ghost visits him, warns him that he could be perpetually imprisoned by chains if he doesn't change. Then the ghost of Christmas past comes along, has a jet of light coming from his head, reminds Scrooge of when he was a solitary child who worshipped a golden idol and became misanthropic. The ghost of Christmas present comes, and he has a horn of plenty. Scrooge sees the reality of the poverty of the Cratchits, and he also sees the destitute children, ignorance and want. Then the ghost of Christmas yet to come, walking slowly, gravely, silently, approaching Scrooge. He shows Scrooge his own grave, and Scrooge begs to sponge away the writing on the gravestone. Finally, Scrooge has changed. He is happy as an angel. He is light as a feather. He has opened up his shut-up heart freely. Okay, wonderful. That is the plot in about 1 minute there. So, here are some key quotes that can go with the plot. At the top, you've got symbol of Malthusian misanthropy. This is him at the beginning. He's cold. He's hard and sharp as flint. Solitary as an oyster. Dark master, etc. He represents Thomas Malthus at the beginning. Then he has his warning from Marley. I wear the chain I forged in life, Marley says. Ghost of Christmas Past says, has a jet of light, and shows him when he was a golden idol. Then the ghost goes to Christmas Present, has a torch, spreads positivity, philanthropy. And then you've got the children of ignorance and want that he shows them, the yellow wolfish. The ghost of Christmas yet to come comes along, and Scrooge says, tell me I may sponge away the writing on that stone. And finally, he has this upward momentum, he has this redemption, and he is light as a feather. So they're key quotes you can use there to summarize Scrooge's journey. We want to look in particular as Scrooge as a symbol of Thomas Malthus. Before we get into that, a tiny bit more context. In the prelude, the preface to the book, which is like an introduction, Dickens states that he wants his ghost of an idea to haunt his readers pleasantly. This ghost is to be philanthropic. He wants his audience to be philanthropic and kind to others. And he wants that idea to haunt his readers, frighten them into changing their views, basically. Right, I want us to draw some comparisons then. We've got this man, Thomas Malthus, misanthropic, malevolent, avaricious views. He thinks paupers are unwelcome and that their death is desirable. He is the antithesis of Charles Dickens. The antithesis means the complete opposite. Okay, Charles Dickens was philanthropic, benevolent, altruistic. Who represents Thomas Malthus in the play then? Let's have a look. Scrooge represents Thomas Malthus. He's solitary and oyster, he's dark master. He is misanthropic, malevolent. But Scrooge in the novella, is the antithesis of Fred. Fred represents Dickens. Fred is all in a glow. He's benevolent. He's philanthropic. So you can use these words antithesis and also analogous to, or you could say Thomas Malthus parallel, or Scrooge parallels Thomas Malthus. Here are some key quotes to show Scrooge as a symbol of Malthusian misanthropy. He is cold, which shows that he's callous, dogmatic, unfeeling, misanthropic. He is solitary as an oyster, which shows he's closed, blinkered, marginalized. He needs a significant force to open up his shut-up heart. And that force is the supernatural. He also says that paupers should die and decrease the surplus population, which shows he has Malthusian attitudes. So this is the extract we're going to look at today. GCSE extract from a few years back. Right, I'll read it quickly. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows, and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil-eyed dark master." Okay, as you can see, it's a 30-mark question. What we need to do then, when you get your extract, you need to be thinking, which quotes can I analyze here? So have a quick look, pause now, and which quotes would you choose? So, for our purposes today, we're going to look at these quotes. Hard and sharp as flint, solitary as an oyster, dark master. We can say a lot about these quotes. We can write a lot about these quotes. There are some key techniques that Dickens has used there. So, first quote we're going to look at, solitary as an oyster. Firstly then, this shows that Scrooge has insulated and marginalized himself. He's closed himself off to society because he wants to avoid philanthropy, which he thinks makes him vulnerable and weak. He does not want to give to charity. Oysters require a significant force to open them. In this novella, that significant force is the supernatural. Scrooge's psyche, or his mind, is hard to open. He has constructed a metaphorical shell around him. This word metaphorical is very important to your analysis, showing that you know what techniques have been used here. Because Scrooge represents Thomas Malthus, we're relating to the question, Dickens suggests violent force is needed to change Malthusian ideas. But oysters do sometimes contain pearls, which could foreshadow goodness, altruism inside Scrooge. Wonderful. Make sure you take a picture of those notes because we're going to need them for the writing task in a little while. And also, like and subscribe to English Einsteins. There will be an abundance of videos coming your way. Also, see the link below for personal tutoring. The second quote we're going to look at. Scrooge says, paupers should die and decrease the surplus population. There's an ellipsis between die and the rest of the quote because some of the quote has been removed here to make it better for our purposes, but you can remember it just like this. Remember to put the ellipsis in. Die and decrease the surplus population. Scrooge thinks it's preferable for paupers or poor people to die. This mirrors Thomas Malthus, who believed there was not enough room at nature's mighty feast for the destitute. Both Scrooge and Malthus are seen as callous, misanthropic, and avaricious. The adjective surplus shows that Scrooge thinks the poor are an unnecessary extra to society. It's a bit like if you gave a smaller bit of change back to somebody and you're just like, oh, keep the surplus. It's because you kind of find it unnecessary. It means that it's an unnecessary extra. So we've zoomed in on that word in particular because it shows Scrooge thinks the poor are unnecessary. Dickens is showing how malevolent Victorians are who follow Malthusian ideas or ideals. Okay, Dickens wanted to prove the Malthusians wrong, to show them how evil this way of thinking was. Next quote, hard and sharp as flint. Scrooge is callous, misanthropic, and has a paucity of compassion. Paucity is a really nice word for lack of. So here's a lack of compassion or a paucity of compassion. The adjective sharp shows that Scrooge causes harm rather than benevolence, because sharp things cause harm. It could also connote that he watches over every little detail. If we say someone is sharp, they're very aware and alert. That's what we mean here as well. There are two different meanings for this here. He also connotes he watches over every little detail, just like how he watches over Bob Cratchit's one lump of coal. The simile flint is a simile because it says hard and sharp as flint. It uses like or as to compare one thing to another. So the simile flint shows that Scrooge and by proxy Malthus have prehistoric primitive views. Okay, because cavemen in prehistoric times would have used flint very often. It's associated with primitive time. So comparing Scrooge to Flint makes his views seem primitive and prehistoric, as well as Malthus's. It also foreshadows the warmth he can bring, because flint can be used to spark a fire, and fire gives warmth, and warmth represents benevolence and philanthropy. So he He will bring warmth when he opens his shut-up heart. Lastly, Dickens is suggesting that Malthusians can change too, and they can become altruistic. If Scrooge can change, then anybody can change, basically. Any Malthusian Victorian individual can become altruistic. Last quote, Dark Master. This shows that Scrooge is malevolent and misanthropic because God is seen as the light. So this quote shows, this quote has anti-Christian connotation. It's almost as if Scrooge is the Antichrist here. He's the opposite of God. He's demonic and satanic. He has a paucity or a lack of light and by proxy warmth. The adjective dark connotes evil, concealment, and cunning. Also, we cannot see in the dark, so perhaps Scrooge is blinkered from societal problems because he has marginalized and isolated himself. Dickens uses Scrooge to suggest that Malthusians are callous and that they subvert or go against Christocentric society. Wonderful. Make sure you get all the notes down and we'll move on to the writing tasks. Here is a model introduction for passing your A Christmas Carol exam. So, at its heart, A Christmas Carol, written in approximately, if you don't know that, then do your research, is a morality novella that aims to warn the audience about how should they be. He's telling them what they should not do. He's warning them what they should not do. Dickens crafts Scrooge as a character who begins the play as, how does he begin the play, but becomes, how does he finish the play? You can use two of the key words from the beginning of the lesson, due to, what is it that makes him change? Something comes along, makes him change. Okay, so that is your introduction that you can literally use for your Christmas Carol exam. Then we move on to the first paragraph, the first quote that we're going to analyze. So Dickens, who experienced something as a child. If you haven't already researched it by now, then I'll tell you. He experienced destitution as a child because his father went to prison. Dickens, who experienced destitution as a child, presents Scrooge as, we can use any of those keywords like misanthropic, callous, or marginalized at the start of the novella. We see this in the quote, solitary as an oyster. Then what you need to do, use those sentence starters with the notes that you've got for that quote and form your paragraph. You can use these same sentence starters for every paragraph. Consistency is the key. For paragraphs 2 to 4, you change it slightly. You can say, Dickens also portrays Scrooge as this. Or furthermore, Dickens depicts Scrooge as this. We see this in the quote, and then you put the second quote in. The paupers should die and decrease the surplus population. For the in other words bit, you need to put the quote into your own words. So you can use one of the notes that we got, really. Then, where it says more specifically, the writer uses a technique to suggest. That's where you put the adjective surplus or the simile flint to suggest this. You need to put the technique in every paragraph. Then finally, on the last sentence starter there, perhaps Dickens intended to, this is where you link it to the context. And down the bottom it says context means events outside of the text at the time it was written. For example, Thomas Malthus or Dickens's childhood. So perhaps Dickens intended to subvert, go against Malthusian ideas. Okay, that's what you need to do for paragraphs 2 to 4. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me.